Okay, so I want to talk about the aesthetic of utopian scholastic and why does it strike such a chord with so many people who see it. A lot of people don't know what I'm talking about when I say utopian scholastic, so don't worry, I'm going to put visuals up on the screen. Um but the thing is like even people who didn't grow up with this aesthetic feel like usually some sense of nostalgia for it when they see it because they understand um, what the artists and thinkers behind this aesthetic were talking about, what the point that they were trying to get across was. And I think you in a way it's like kind of a subgenre of vaporwave, but it's also kind of different in that there's not necessarily an exclusive musical movement behind it. Yes, there is music. Um, if you look at if you just go on YouTube and you Google and you search for the eyewitness, spelled EYE witness intro, you'll see the kind of music, and there's also like utopian scholastic playlists and stuff, but it wasn't quite the musical movement that vaporwave was. Maybe it's a subgenre. I mean, there is utopian virtual, which is pretty similar in its sound and aesthetic, but utopian scholastic strikes a completely different chord with me and a lot of people because we remember seeing this kind of stuff on TV, in documentaries, in textbooks at school, in those little nature documentaries that they would have us watch when the substitute teacher was in science class or whatever. You would see the aesthetic to an extent on like Bill Nye, and you would just see it in just places of higher learning, museums, whatever. And I think in a way the utopian scholastic aesthetic represents kind of the last time that we as a society had our youth had something to like look forward to, and we had like an optimistic view of scientific progress and technology moving forward and stuff. Now we just view these things cynically. You think of technological advancement, you think of people like Elon Musk, you think of people like Peter Thiel, or am I thinking of the right person? Yeah, Peter Thiel. And you think of AI and how it destroys all these jobs. You think of data centers and how it destroys the environment just for the sake of destroying more jobs so that way rich people can get even richer. And, I think we're just kind of like disillusioned by what we've got out of all this progress that was kind of promised to us in the, I want to say, the 20th century. We had like a view that the future was bright, and it was very utopian, much like the aesthetic name suggests, utopian scholastic. And we felt that, going to Mars was like this achievement or whatever that we looked forward to, and now everyone's just like, ugh, because, and I think a big part of that is because of the fact that it's all privatized now. It used to be that these achievements were done through NASA or some other organization that sort of belonged to all of us. It was done through the universities. Progress was made through things like NASA. Now it's done by SpaceX. And now it's all the achievement of one man and his ludicrous wealth that he achieved only through exploiting and fucking people over. And so now that we see the technological advancement, it's really just viewed as this grotesque monument to the exploitation that is being done upon regular everyday people and people in third world countries. Whereas before, whenever NASA did something, in a sense, it was almost like it was everyone's achievement when these kinds of things came out in the past. It was like it belonged to all of humanity. It belonged to all of mankind. And, this paints a pretty bleak picture. But I'm kind of making this video to say that it's still kind of there in a sense. That, the fact alone that people are making content under this aesthetic, the utopian scholastic stuff, it suggests to me that it's still alive, obviously, within the human spirit, but it's also kind of, it's still somewhat prevalent in our culture. And I'm going to give you two examples. The first one is going to be the open source movement. Now, these people, these nerds, they pretty much never dropped the spirit. They stand to gain almost nothing from doing open source development other than just clout and whatever you get from making the tool itself, but not money, because it's not something that you sell. The open source software community, it sort of spawned out of this time when utopian scholastic, of course we wouldn't have called it that back then, but that was the idea behind progress in the 90s to early 2000s. And maybe even to the late 80s. Possibly before that. But yeah, I forgot exactly when the open source software movement started, but it was somewhere around the 70s or 80s, because I know Richard Stallman, you can look him up. Him and Linus Torvalds kind of like kicked it off a little bit. I know they might not have been the first ones to it, but those are kind of the guys that you would... them and Eric S. Raymond. If you look into those guys, you can learn all about the history of the open source software movement. But it's still very much alive. People are still developing software that is both free to use and free to copy and modify. The source code is out there. The blueprint is there. There's a smaller but still existent open source science movement to sort of keep the knowledge free, but for the most part, these paid academic journals kind of monopolize everything, unfortunately. But there is a movement to do science as a whole on an open source basis, and I think that's good. That kind of represents the spirit of what utopian scholastic was about, at least in my opinion. Of course, there's more to it than that, but I'm going to get to that. If you look at another aesthetic called solar punk. Solar punk is, in my opinion, the inevitable continuation of this way of thinking. Free, open source, everything, renewable energy, as much as you can sustain it in a communal sense. That is the idea behind it. And I would have to make a whole new video about solar punk, and I probably will. But I think it kind of like embodies the spirit of the utopian scholastic, and kind of like it hits on the same chord, even though it's not exactly the same. But, you guys can tell me what your opinion is. Like, does it relate at all? I feel like it does, because it keeps it kind of keeps the dream going. And whereas we're currently heading into this unfortunate cyberpunk dystopia, utopian scholastic and solar punk kind of represents an alternate future timeline where we get everything right and we do things for the betterment of humanity. We do things not purely based on profit motive and scarcity and trying to exploit and extract everything that we possibly can. I think these are the dreams that we should be striving for. And, maybe this video came across as a little bit preachy, but whatever, that's somebody's got to get this stuff out there. And I would, if anyone knows anything about any of this stuff, feel free to say whatever you have on your mind, because I feel like a community, building a community around these aesthetics and ideas would be a great thing that could, at the very least, help to inspire people to kind of get this type of shit going. I think, we need to bring together as many like-minded individuals on the subject as possible. I think some people think that it's just a cool aesthetic or whatever, but it's, in my opinion, it's not. It really does strike at a deeper chord of, the human psyche and what good, decent, honest people would want out of a future society. And I think we need to be shaping that in whatever way that we possibly can. I know it's not at all realistic to just hope to completely undo the unfortunate oligarchical cyberpunk dystopia that we're heading towards, but we can try to use technologies, and there's a lot of communities already that are trying to foster this idea of sort of like decentralized community organization and using non-renewable or renewable energy sources like little solar panels and other means of growing abundance without being necessarily exploitative. Sorry, my voice is failing on me here, but that's seems as good of a time as any to end the video. But yeah, if you guys have any thoughts on this subject, let me know.